I'm preaching a series over there in the sanctuary called The Long View. And just to kind of set the context for you, last Sunday I talked about what needs to happen before you can take the long view, and that is that you have to be able to close the page, turn the page from the old to the new. You have to put behind you a lot of things that may be old resentments. Maybe you need to forgive others, forgive yourself. You need to turn the page so that you can really focus on going forward with God as your guide. Today, we're going to be talking about really what is the central thought of this sermon series, and that is the long view and being guided by the long view. And I'm going to read the text from, I'm sorry I didn't hear your, where is Cindy? I'm sorry I can't see you. You're here someplace. There, Cindy, there you go. I'm sorry I didn't hear your song because Cindy and I talked about it earlier, and I know it was a wonderful, wonderful song. But I'm going to be reading about the wise men. This is the first Sunday in Epiphany, and Epiphany is a wise man story. The wise men come to the manger, and it's one of the signs that Jesus is revealed as the King, not just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles. So that's an epiphany. An epiphany is a revelation or an unveiling of an important and powerful truth. But it also works. There are all sorts of passages that work with this particular sermon, but this one certainly works. And we'll be talking about how the wise men were guided by God's vision made physical in the star. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, I forgot my glasses. I'm really proud I'm able to read this. I shouldn't speak too fast. Wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. Overwhelmed with joy. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Several months ago, I wrote a column on Thursday, and I honestly don't remember what the column was about, but I remember receiving a reply from Kurt Balow. Now, some of you may know Kurt. He's one of our tenor soloists in the sanctuary choir. And he wrote a wonderful story telling me about how he grew up living next to his grandfather. His parents moved right next to his grandfather. His grandfather owned a farm. And so he grew up doing farm chores and learned how to drive a tractor at a very, very young age. And then he wrote me about some advice that his grandfather gave him. And I want to just read this for you if I can, because he says it as well as I could. He said, "Don, I thought you were going to finish your story with the same words that my grandfather said to me when I was about 10 years old. I had already been driving the tractor with various implements for several years. But when I was 10, I was given a chance to plow for the very first time. After trying it and seeing that I was unable to make the nice, neat rows I was expecting to make, I asked him how he did it. He answered, but it was years later before I realized he wasn't just talking about plowing. His advice worked for plowing, and even today I find that it works for mowing too. But then his advice wasn't just about farming, and I have played his words over and over in my head during many of my life's challenges. This is what he said. If you want to make straight rows, you have to focus on something off in the distance and make that your goal. Don't let the things up close distract you too much, or you'll just keep going crooked no matter how hard you try. Keep your eyes on your goal. Now, those are wise words, aren't they? Those are truly wise words from a really wise man. You know, there are different ways of structuring a sermon. Sometimes the introduction has just kind of a tease in the sermon. It's just going to tell you a little bit about what the sermon is going to be about, so stay tuned. Other times, the introduction has the whole message in the sermon, the whole thesis. And this is one of those times. This is the message. Keep your eyes on that long-term goal guiding your life the way God would want it to be guided. That's the message. And so you could get up really now. You get up right now and you could leave and you say, I've got the message. I'd prefer that you not do that because I'm going to talk about it a little bit. But that really is the big picture I want you to keep in mind. When we look at the wise men, and we call them wise for a reason, don't we? They were truly admired as being the wise ones of their time. It doesn't make any difference how you interpret this story, whether you see it more as a romantic, poetic kind of a picture, or whether you read it literally. What we know about the wise men, we know a few things about the wise men. They came from a foreign country. They were not Jews. They were Gentiles. And we know that they were admired and respected by their people. They were astronomers, for sure. Astrologers, probably. Cosmologists, those who try to figure out the whole origin and structure of the universe. Philosophers, maybe. Deep thinkers. People who are trying to figure out the meaning of life. And so this was their big goal. They were trying to find out, where is God? Who is God? How will the world be saved? So they had their eyes focused on this really, really big picture. So when they started out to get the answer, they followed the star. They followed the star. As did all the great navigators of old. You think about those who first set off to cross the seas to find new lands. Think of Columbus, if you will. They were guided by the North Star, weren't they? Now, St. Peter and his buddies, they could get on a boat on the Sea of Galilee and kind of putter around and not get lost. I've been on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. It's kind of like being on Lake Texoma, you know. You could get lost for a while, but pretty soon you're going to find your way to Caesarea or wherever it is you're going. That's where I went. I went to Caesarea across the Sea of Galilee. But if you're starting out on a really long journey, a big journey, you need the ultimate guide, a star, to guide your journey so that you can stay on course. So far, so good. Here's the problem with you and me as human beings. And that is, as much as we want to be big picture thinkers, we tend to get distracted. And we tend, like Kurt trying to plow, we tend to get off course and we go back and forth, back and forth. We don't live in straight lines for the most part. I remember my friend Ken Johnson, when I was a first-year student at Southwestern University, he enrolled with me and we became good friends. And Ken had what he called his grazing theory, his grazing philosophy of life. And this is the way it went. He said, look at cows. Have you ever looked at cows, the way they live their lives? They literally live their lives going from clump to clump. They have their noses down, and they go from one clump of grass to the next. They eat that clump, and then they just go to the next one. And they just kind of wander around life without any real plan or vision or reason. And he said, I think that's the way most human beings live their lives. Well, look, I'd like to respectfully disagree. I think Ken was a little bit too cynical about that. The truth of the matter is, as human beings, most of us don't go from clump to clump. A lot of people do. You see that. You know that's true. But most of us, especially in this town, we don't do that. We're really good goal setters in this town. And we know some of those goals that are really, really important to us. For instance, a person will have this goal. I want to graduate from college, and then I want to get my graduate degree. And that's a big goal. Some of us have what Jim Collins called BHAGs. You remember that? Big, hairy, audacious goals. You know, I want to be elected mayor, then I want to be elected governor, then I want to be the president of the United States. That's a good goal to have, isn't it? We have these big goals. I want to meet and marry the perfect spouse. That's a really good goal. I'm just curious about this. How many of you met and married the perfect? No, don't. I could blow up a lot of marriages that way. So But you know what I'm talking about. We are very good at having those midterm, short-term and midterm goals. The problem in the context of the Christian life of discipleship is that even those goals are not enough. They're just simply not enough. I'll give you a couple of examples. Here's what we know, and this is research-based. Next week I'm going to talk some more about the research that we have about what leads to what I prefer to call it a satisfying life. Or it's happiness research, but I prefer that word satisfying. There's research and we know what does, to some extent, we know what does and does not lead to a satisfying life. Here's what we know about those big goals that we go after. Maybe the goal to make a lot of money. Nothing wrong with having the goal to make a lot of money. But here's what we've discovered, and that is that they bring a heightened level of satisfaction, an emotional high, if you will, that lasts for approximately 6 months. And then after 6 months, we go down to our base level of kind of the emotional tone in our lives. So I don't know whether you've ever thought about this or not, but stay with me for a minute and think about this. That new house that you bought, and you thought this is my dream home. It's the perfect house. Or maybe you've never owned a home. Maybe it was the car that you bought. Or maybe the person you married, whatever. But that new house, and you buy that new house and you walk in and you say, this is all I'll ever need in life. And am I not right about this? For about 6 months, you walk around and you just literally float around in your new home. It's just perfect. But after about 6 months, the emotional tone comes down and life becomes average again, right? I see y'all shaking your head. You know this is true. The same is true when you get the new job or the big promotion. You marry the perfect person. Things usually kind of settle down again. This is interesting. This is research-based. The person who wins the lottery is on an emotional high for about 6 months. And after that, they settle back down, guess what? To a little bit lower than where they were before. The reason is that their lives have been changed so radically. They started going to fancy restaurants and buying lots of stuff. Their lives have been changed so radically that they've given up the little things that they did that brought them pleasure. Taking the dog for a walk. Taking the children to the zoo. Holding hands with your spouse. And so as important as these big goals are, as important as they are, they're not enough. It's possible to reach every single one of your goals. Get the degree, get the job, get the house, get the spouse, get the money, get the retirement, get to that point at the end, close to the end of your life, and still be disappointed with life. So that's why this thing about the wise men is so important, that there be an overarching guide, not a penultimate goal, but an ultimate goal, where God leads your life and you find power and meaning and purposefulness and a sense of satisfaction because of where God is taking you and what God is making of you. This morning, we're not going to get into the specifics about that. We're going to deal with that next week. And we invite you can always tune in on a video podcast if you want to get a sanctuary sermon. And we encourage them over there to do the same thing. But I want to say a couple of things that will kind of contextualize this for you. The first is this. It is important to be thoughtful about your life. If you have this big goal, if you decide to be a wise person and you say, God, give me a vision of who you want me to become, this big goal way out that will guide my life all the way through, guess what that will do? It will force you to be thoughtful about your life. And let me give you an example that some of you may be familiar with. The book Stephen Covey. You remember the book Stephen Covey? I think it was the 7 Habits of the Effective Person a number of years ago. You may remember reading this. He said one thing that every person should do, doesn't sound like much fun, but he said one thing that every person should do is to think out about their funeral. And imagine yourself sitting out there in one of the church pews during your memorial service. What is it that you want people to be saying about you? You want them to say, She made a lot of money. Well, nothing wrong with that. He was very, very successful. Nothing wrong with that. He pastored a really large church. Nothing wrong with any of those things. But what else would you like for them to say about you? How did your life influence the lives of others? When it was all said and done, and you come to the end and they close the grave, or they close the little door out here in the columbarium right back here, what is it you want people to remember about you? If you consider that, it will force you to be thoughtful about your life. There's another thing that is important here, I think, and that is that when you make your way through life on your particular journey, it is important to kind of adjust that radar screen so you've got the biggest view possible. Now, years ago, I used to fly airplanes. I never had an airplane that had a radar in it. I thought that would be really cool. But some of you have flown airplanes and you had radars in them. But we've all had the experience of watching TV and looking at the weather report and the weather radar, right? And you know how they can zoom those radars in and out, in and out. So you can be watching the radar during the stormy season and they'll say, well, here's the big picture, but they're going to zoom in on Collinsville. That's where Siete Ranch is, where the storms never come for whatever reason. We never get rain in Siete Ranch. We're going to zoom in on Siete Ranch and see how dry it is. The truth is, you don't want to zoom in when it comes to your life. If you zoom in, you're always going to be distracted by the little things in life. You want to have that big picture in life so that you're not being tossed around by all the small distractions and the tiny things that go wrong. Years ago, I was driving around in my truck, and there was a show, some program on the radio, and they were interviewing this guy. I don't remember whether he was a therapist or not, but it sounds like the kind of thing a therapist would say. And he said, look, it's really important to not sweat the small stuff. You've heard that, right? Don't sweat the small stuff. I've heard that a bajillion times. But then he said something I'll never forget. He said, and it's important to remember that most of it is small stuff. If you leave here today and that's all you remember, it might have been worth the hour you spent in this service. Most of it is small stuff. Not all of it. You get a new baby in your family, that's big stuff. You bet it is. You or somebody you love gets a life-threatening disease, diagnosis, that's big stuff. Someone you love passes away. I have a terrible tragedy in our family right now. Kara Kleckler, 40 years old. It's big stuff. It's big stuff. But the very nature of those things that happen every now and then, it's big stuff. It puts things in perspective, doesn't it? The rest of it is just small stuff. So we get to choose whether we kind of make our journey through life just being tossed back and forth, just in the midst of all of this turbulence because of the small things that go wrong, or whether we can step back and see the big picture and say, God, guide me through the journey in my life. I'm not going to be distracted by the small things. I'm going to close here by showing you a couple of slides that we used over there. You've got better screens over here than we have over there. Yeah, these are really good screens. I can actually see this. This is a slide that may be familiar to some of you. This is a chart, a graphic of the Dow Jones Industrial Average between the years 1900 and 1920. Now, do not mistake me here. I'm not in any way suggesting that the progress of the stock market is any way similar to the life well lived. But these are familiar charts. They're easy to get, and I think they do symbolically illustrate our lives in some ways. What do you notice when you see this particular chart, 1900 to 1920? You notice a ton of volatility, don't you? I mean, it looks like you're in a tornado, up and down, up and down, up and down, and you don't see much progress, do you? It's pretty much a level chart. In many ways, if you take the small view in life, that's what life looks like, isn't it? We don't live our lives on a plateau. We don't live them on the descent all the time. We live our lives like this. We have good and joyous up moments. We go down. We have crisis moments or sad moments, back up. And if you thought that your life ultimately looked just like this, it would be pretty discouraging, wouldn't it? It's too dadgum turbulent. For me, I think it is for most of you. But when we pull the radar back and we look at the big view, here's a picture of the stock market. That same part is right down there at the left, on the left lower hand corner. Here's a picture of the stock market from 1900 till today. And what do you notice is different? Two things are different. The first is an upward trajectory. How many of you would like to live your life on an upward trajectory? I'm telling you, I'll say it again, the stock market is not the same as the life well lived. But isn't that something we'd like for our lives to look like? If you live to be 30 or 40 or 60 or 80 or 90 years old, we'd like for it to be an upward trajectory. We know it can't be a smooth upward trajectory, but it can be an upward trajectory. The second thing is, it's not perfectly smooth. There are ups and downs, but it's smoothed out, isn't it? I think this is the view that God wants us to take. Don't sweat the small stuff, and most of it is small stuff. If you keep your eye on the long view, if you allow God's star to guide you through your life, it's easier for you to not sweat the small stuff. I'll close just real quick. One extra word. It just came to me last night. My wife Bobby and I were going out to eat. We go out every Saturday night, try to every Saturday night, eat Mexican food. And we were driving to our favorite place. And we were talking about our grandchildren. Our older grandchild just turned 7. Our younger one's almost 3. I'd had them out during the day out at the ranch. And we were talking about some of the things that have happened to them. They've had, like all children, they've had kind of a bumpy ride at times. And I was commenting about that. And I said, you know what though, Bobs? Here's one thing we know. When children or adult human beings have a bumpy ride and they survive, they become more resilient. Isn't that true? They become more resilient. And that got me to thinking, and I added that to this sermon. Every person I have admired in life has had that quality. They've been resilient. They haven't lived perfect lives. They haven't lived flawless lives. Some of them have had great failures, moral failures and otherwise. But they've had the quality of resilience. They've taken the bumps and bruises in life, and they've gotten up, they've dusted themselves off, and they've been stronger and smarter and more committed to the spiritual life and the spiritual journey. If you take the long view, it will make you stronger. It will make you wiser. It will make you more resilient. Take the long view. The wise men did. You and I can as well. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.